Tyler, hands where I can see them.
Okay, they're up. What is going on?
The guest vehicles you've been taking off this property overnight for 2.5 years, 61 trips on cars that were supposed to be parked.
Tyler Brooks spent every childhood weekend trimming hedges outside houses he'd never be invited into. As a valet, he finally had the keys.
That wasn't me. The overnight shift has 2 people. Sometimes someone else has access to those keys.
I've been saying that for months.
Okay.
He would not get the chance to wipe one more trip log before hotel security pulled the telematics data themselves. Within days, investigators would trace 61 separate unauthorized joyrides across 34 different guest vehicles over 2.5 years. A pattern hidden behind a handwritten notebook of doctored mileage figures that never once matched what a guest's own car was quietly recording about itself. 2 of those vehicles came back with damage billed to the resort's insurance as ordinary valet wear and tear. 2 friends had even paid him cash for the chance to borrow a stranger's car for the night. One guest's own connected car app was the only reason any of it ever surfaced at all. What began as one late-night drive in a stranger's convertible would end with a 26-year-old lead valet attendant facing grand theft charges for treating a luxury resort's guest garage like his own personal fleet. 61 times. Sit with that number for a second. Type in the comments if you think you'd have caught this if it were your car. Subscribe if this is your first time here. The story only gets more unbelievable. Tyler Jameson Brooks was born in 1997 in Naples, Florida, the younger of 2 children. His father ran a small pool and landscaping service that maintained properties for some of the wealthiest homeowners along the Gulf Coast, and his mother worked as a housekeeper at a different beachfront resort a few miles from the one Tyler would eventually work at himself. Tyler grew up, in his own words to a probation officer years later, surrounded by a version of wealth he could see clearly but never quite touch, riding along on his father's landscaping jobs past infinity pools and 6 car garages that belonged to people he would never actually meet. On weekends, he sometimes helped his father trim hedges at properties with circular driveways full of cars worth more than his family's house, an image he later admitted had stayed with him well into adulthood. He graduated from Naples High School in 2015 and spent the next several years bouncing between service jobs, a stint bussing tables at a beachfront restaurant, a summer working the pool concession stand at a different resort, before landing a position as a valet runner at the Wyndemere Palm Resort in 2019 at 22 years old. The job paid modestly in base wage, but well in tips, and Tyler was, by every account from supervisors and coworkers, genuinely good at it, remembering guest names and preferences, parking with a careful precision regular guests specifically requested him by name for. A 2020 supervisor evaluation described him as the guest experience team's most reliable overnight presence, a compliment about his very unsupervised hours that would later read very differently once the case became public. His reliability earned him a promotion to lead valet attendant in 2021, a role that came with more responsibility and, critically, regular solo overnight shifts, running the valet stand by himself between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. Since the resort's self-run valet operation, unlike a third-party contracted service, did not staff a second overnight attendant for a stand that saw relatively little activity during those hours. He had been dating his girlfriend, Madison, a nail technician at a Naples salon, since 2020, and the 2 of them shared a modest 1-bedroom apartment roughly 15 minutes from the resort. Tyler drove a 12-year-old sedan with over 140,000 miles on it, a car he was, by his own later admission, quietly embarrassed to park anywhere near the resort's guest entrance during his shifts. Madison later told investigators she had ridden along on several of the unauthorized trips without fully understanding, at the time, that the cars belonged to specific guests currently staying at the resort rather than being part of some informal perk of Tyler's job that she simply hadn't asked too many questions about. Therefore, 4 years into a job that put him alone, overnight, in sole physical possession of the keys to some of the most expensive cars in Southwest Florida, 24-year-old Tyler Brooks was sitting behind a valet stand podium every night with nothing standing between him and a guest's Porsche except his own judgment. A boundary that, sometime in 2021, quietly stopped holding. The Wyndemere Palm Resort operated its valet service in-house rather than contracting it out to a third-party parking management company, a decision the resort's leadership had made specifically to offer guests a more personalized, luxury standard experience, with lead attendants like Brooks expected to know regular guests by name and remember their preferences from stay to stay. A level of individualized service that, ironically, was precisely what had made Brooks so good at his job in the first place, and precisely what gave him the standing to be trusted alone with the keys for as long as he was. That same personalized model meant the valet stand's staffing and oversight structure was built around trust in individual attendants rather than the layered accountability a larger third-party operation might have imposed, since a franchised valet contractor typically answers to its own separate corporate compliance structure. One more layer of oversight the resort's in-house model had deliberately traded away in favor of a more intimate guest experience. Guest vehicles typically stayed in the resort's care for 3 to 9 days at a time, and several guests, particularly those traveling internationally for extended trips, left their cars parked at the resort for considerably longer, sometimes weeks, with no expectation that anyone would check on the vehicle beyond routine security patrols. At check-in, the attendant on duty logged each vehicle's condition and mileage into the resort's official digital system, a figure that became the baseline a guest expected to see unchanged, give or take a short distance for repositioning within the garage when the car was eventually returned. Overnight, the valet stand ran with a single attendant on duty, a staffing decision that reflected genuinely low overnight demand for active valet retrieval, but that also meant, for 8 hours at a stretch, one person held physical custody of dozens of guest vehicles with no supervisor, no second attendant, and no live oversight beyond whatever the resort's exterior security cameras happened to. Capture in passing. The cameras themselves covered the garage's entrance and exit points, but not the interior parking rows, meaning a vehicle's brief absence from a specific space, if the attendant timed its return correctly before shift change, would never appear in any footage anyone would think to review. That structure, built around the reasonable assumption that a trusted lead attendant would treat guest vehicles with the same care whether or not anyone was watching, worked exactly as intended for 2 years of Brooks's employment. It also meant that once he decided a guest's car could leave the property and come back before anyone checked the mileage against the log, there was functionally nothing in the resort system positioned to catch him doing it in real time. The first documented unauthorized trip traced back to sometime in 2021, not long after Brooks's promotion gave him regular solo overnight shifts. According to his own later statements to investigators, it began almost casually, taking a guest's convertible for a short drive along the coastal road during a slow overnight shift simply because the opportunity was there and the car was, in his words, just sitting in the garage doing nothing anyway. Nothing happened. No alarm, no guest complaint, no discrepancy anyone noticed before checkout. He remembered the specific make and model of that first car years later, with a clarity investigators found notable, describing the drive itself, the empty coastal road at 2 a.m, in more detail than he offered for almost any of the 60 that followed. Therefore, within weeks, he did it again. The pattern escalated steadily rather than dramatically over the following 2.5 years. What began as an occasional solo drive along the coast became, by 2022, a routine Brooks built his overnight shifts around, specifically selecting higher-end and sports models belonging to guests booked for multiple nights, correctly calculating that a single overnight guest's mileage discrepancy was far more likely to be noticed at next morning checkout than one spread across a longer. Multi-day stay where the guest had less reason to check the odometer closely at return. He kept a mental list of which vehicles were, in his own later description, worth the risk, generally favoring convertibles and sports cars over sedans and SUVs, a preference that had less to do with concealment strategy and more, he admitted, with simply wanting to drive something he otherwise never would. He developed a system to conceal what he was doing. Rather than logging accurate mileage in the resort's official digital check-in system, Brooks maintained a separate, informal notebook hidden in his own locker, recording artificially adjusted odometer figures calibrated to match what a guest would reasonably expect to see, rather than what the car had actually accumulated during his personal use of it. On vehicles equipped with connected infotainment systems, he learned to clear the trip computer history and recent navigation destinations before returning the car to its parking space, a habit that worked reliably against any guest who simply glanced at the dashboard, but that, critically, did nothing to erase data being independently logged by the manufacturer's own connected car servers, a distinction Brooks either never understood or chose not to think about too closely. He refueled every vehicle he took before returning it, a habit he later described to investigators as a point of genuine pride, insisting he always treated the cars right even as he took them somewhere they were never supposed to go. By 2022, Brooks had also begun lending select vehicles to two friends for their own personal errands, on at least 6 documented occasions accepting a flat cash payment in exchange for access during a specific overnight window when he knew he would be the sole attendant on duty. Text messages later recovered between Brooks and one friend showed the arrangement discussed casually, almost like scheduling a favor rather than anything either of them treated as a serious crime. One friend asking to borrow the truck for a weekend errand run in exchange for $40 toward gas, and Brooks confirming a specific overnight window without hesitation. Twice during the scheme, a vehicle Brooks or one of his friends had taken off property sustained minor accident damage. On both occasions, Brooks directed the repair to a body shop owned by an acquaintance, then submitted the resulting invoice through the resort's general vehicle damage insurance process, as though the damage had occurred during ordinary valet parking operations on the property. A claim that generated no particular scrutiny, given how routinely minor valet parking dings and scrapes were already processed through that same channel. The body shop owner, a former high school classmate, was never charged in connection with the scheme, having told investigators he had simply assumed the repairs were legitimate resort business each time Brooks brought a vehicle in. By late 2023, the scheme had grown to at least 61 documented unauthorized vehicle uses across 34 different guest vehicles, totaling an estimated 2,900 miles of undisclosed personal driving, all of it happening within overnight shifts. Nobody at the resort was actively watching in real time. In October 2023, a guest staying at the resort for a 6-day business conference happened to check his vehicle's manufacturer connected app out of ordinary habit, something he did periodically regardless of where the car was parked. He noticed a Maps history entry showing a destination roughly 40 minutes from the hotel, logged at 2:47 in the morning on a night his car should have remained parked in the resort's valet garage the entire time. He contacted hotel security directly, who initially assumed the entry reflected some kind of system glitch or a valet repositioning the vehicle within the garage, until the guest walked them through the actual destination and the 2-hour window the app showed the car remaining stationary there. Reviewing the resort's overnight valet staffing logs against the exact timestamp narrowed the responsible shift to a single attendant on duty that night. Rather than confronting Brooks directly on unverified suspicion, hotel security, with the guest's authorization, requested a full telematics data download directly from the vehicle manufacturer, a step that would confirm or rule out an actual unauthorized trip independent of anything the resort's own valet paperwork claimed. The general manager later told investigators the resort had never previously needed to request manufacturer telematics data for any prior guest complaint, meaning the entire verification process was assembled essentially from scratch specifically for this one guest's suspicion. The manufacturer's telematics data confirmed a complete, unambiguous, unauthorized trip. The forensic download showed the vehicle leaving the resort property, traveling directly to a residential address, remaining parked there for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and returning to the resort before the start of the morning shift change, all while the resort's own valet stand paperwork for that vehicle showed no activity logged whatsoever for the entire overnight window. Hotel management, now treating the matter as a formal internal investigation rather than an isolated guest complaint, cross-referenced the residential address the telematics data showed against available records and found it matched an apartment leased to Brooks's girlfriend, Madison. A subsequent search of Brooks's employee locker, authorized by hotel management under the terms of his employment agreement, recovered the handwritten notebook containing altered mileage figures for at least 34 separate vehicles. Figures that did not match the resort's official digital check in records for those same vehicles on the same dates. Investigators also recovered text messages between Brooks and the two friends who had borrowed vehicles, including the exchange about borrowing the truck for $40 toward gas. Messages that established the unauthorized use extended beyond Brooks's own personal driving into an informal arrangement he was profiting from directly. One of the two friends, once interviewed, told investigators he had genuinely believed Brooks had some kind of informal permission to occasionally loan out vehicles during slow overnight shifts. An assumption he said he had never actually questioned given how casually Brooks always offered. A review of the resort's vehicle damage insurance claims uncovered the 2 body shop invoices tied to accident damage sustained during unauthorized use, with repair dates that did not correspond to any incident actually reported through the resort's official guest damage claim process, confirming both repairs had been billed as routine valet damage to conceal trips that were never supposed to have happened at all. The smoking gun was the combination of the manufacturer's independent telematics data and Brooks's own handwritten notebook together. One data source he had no ability to alter, showing exactly where a guest's car had gone and for how long. And one data source he had personally falsified, showing precisely how he had tried to make the resort's own paperwork match a lie. On November 9th, 2023, at 6:15 in the evening, Collier County Sheriff's Office economic crimes detectives approached Brooks at the valet stand as he began his overnight shift. "Tyler, we need to talk with you about some vehicle mileage discrepancies," the lead detective said. Brooks shrugged, leaning against the podium with an easy grin. "Man, cars get moved around the garage all the time. That stuff never lines up exactly. We're not talking about a few miles. We're talking about a 2-hour trip to your girlfriend's apartment logged on the manufacturer's own system." His grin faltered slightly, but didn't fully disappear. "Okay. Look, it's not that deep. Nobody's car got hurt. I always brought them back exactly where they started. We have 34 vehicles in a notebook from your locker that says otherwise." For the first time, he didn't have a quick answer ready. He glanced past the detective toward the guest entrance, then back down at his own hands. "I wasn't trying to steal anybody's car, man. I just wanted to know what it felt like. Just for a night. You did it 61 times. I know how that number sounds, man. But it never felt like 61 times when I was doing it. It just felt like a Tuesday. It wasn't your car to make a Tuesday out of." He didn't answer that one. The easy posture he'd been leaning into the podium with straightened slowly, and for the first time that evening, he looked genuinely young standing there in his valet uniform. "I think I need a lawyer before I say anything else," he said quietly. He was placed in handcuffs at the same valet stand podium where for 2 years, guests had handed him their keys without a second thought at 6:23 that evening, in front of a line of arriving dinner guests watching from the circular driveway, several of whom, hotel staff later noted, had likely handed Brooks their own keys at some point over the previous 2 years without any idea what he had done with vehicles just like theirs. The sentencing is next, and one guest's statement to the court might change how you look at your own hotel valet forever. Subscribe if you want more of these every week. Prosecutors in the 20th Judicial Circuit charged Brooks with grand theft of a motor vehicle, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, insurance fraud, and falsifying business records. A Collier County grand jury returned the indictment in January 2024, facing the manufacturer's telematics data, his own recovered notebook, and the text messages establishing he had profited from lending vehicles to friends. Brooks pleaded guilty to all 4 charges in March 2024, rather than proceed to trial, an outcome his public defender described as reflecting the overwhelming and largely unfalsifiable nature of the telematics evidence against him. At sentencing, the guest whose connected app had first surfaced the discrepancy addressed the court. "I checked that app out of habit, not suspicion," he said. "I want people to understand how easily this could have gone unnoticed forever. I happened to look at the right moment. Most guests never would have. I think about the other 33 cars and wonder how many of those owners still have no idea." The court sentenced Brooks to 3 years in state prison and ordered $47,000 in restitution to the resort's insurer and the 2 guests whose vehicles had sustained the unauthorized use accident damage. As a condition of his probation following release, he was permanently barred from holding any hospitality position involving guest property custody anywhere in Collier County. Assistant State Attorney Miguel Torres Aldana noted at sentencing that while the dollar figure in the case was modest compared to many financial crimes his office prosecuted, the sheer number of individual vehicles and guests affected made the pattern of deception itself the more serious concern. The Wyndemere Palm Resort discontinued its solo overnight valet staffing model following the case, requiring 2 attendants on duty at all hours and implementing a randomized overnight vehicle movement audit tied directly to each vehicle's manufacturer telematics data rather than relying solely on its own internal paperwork. For 2.5 years, he borrowed a Life 61 times and always brought it back before anyone woke up. The case waiting on the right-hand side never got returned at all,